Welcome to the Coordinated Chaos podcast. I'm your host, Georgia, and I'm just your type B bestie, going deep on all things behind the scenes of building a business, women's health, and life's defining moments. Episode 14. We've come a long way already, and I'm quite proud of that. And today's episode is something that I've touched on a couple of times in some other episodes, but it's time to go deep on a topic in women's health and a topic that is close to my heart, and that is emotional eating. I'm going to speak about my journey and my experience with emotional eating and how I healed my relationship with food, what emotional eating actually is, and how you can overcome emotional eating too, or take some of the first steps to do it. This is going to be a bit of a deep dive into the things that I recommend my clients to do, the processes that I did to overcome it. And I had to really look at this from the perspective of what did I actually do to overcome it? Because overcoming emotional eating for me was a process that happened over many, many years, and I didn't really fully consciously do it on purpose or with the guidance of someone else. Before we start as well, I want to recognize as well that if you are someone who is struggling with disordered eating and you feel like your relationship to food is really detrimental to the quality of your life, it is really important as well that you are open with yourself and honest with yourself about where that currently is and how much it is affecting your life, and whether or not you may need to seek further assistance from psychological help or a professional that can actually give you really good strategies if this is something that is really, really bothering you. Having said that though, I'm going to talk about emotional eating rather than disordered eating today. And so again, just be mindful, disclaimer, little trigger warning that this could be something that might bring up some emotions for you that might not feel too comfortable. And it's definitely going to be a vulnerable share from me. And if you're feeling like your relationship with food is not going to be fixed by some of the tips and tricks that I provide to you today, it is definitely 100% worth speaking to a professional about your situation to see if it's worth exploring deeper and getting different kind of help for. Okay. I'm going to start by kind of explaining and talking to you about what emotional eating actually is. Usually, emotional eating is an overwhelming desire to consume and often to overeat foods, even when hunger isn't present. It's essentially an emotionally triggered action and an emotional attachment to food that gives you comfort or relief of some kind. It can also bring up feelings and negative after effects, such as feeling sick, feeling too full, feeling bloated, digestive pains, guilt, shame, disappointment, and lack of self-control. These are all very common feelings and after effects of emotional eating or having a binge moment. Whether or not you're conscious of it, emotional eating is a way for you to self-soothe your negative emotions, and what we as a society have learnt to make ourselves feel better when we feel stressed, angry, lonely, sad, depressed, boredom, anxious, maybe even happy and celebrating. We can definitely associate food and overeating and treating ourselves with joy as well as some of these negative emotions as well. Every person's experience of emotional eating is going to be completely different, completely nuanced. So when I'm speaking about my experience and my journey, please take that with a grain of salt and understand that I understand that your journey may be slightly different, and that's why it's really important to actually seek some help with this if it is something that you are struggling with, because not only may you be experiencing this in a different way with different emotions, you may also need a different action plan as well. So be really mindful of that as we go through this today. My experience with emotional eating, I guess it stemmed from my natural inclination to always want to eat a bigger portion, a bigger serving, having a bigger hunger than a lot of people around me in my life. And I would say that this brought up comments from people around me a lot of the time saying, oh, you have such a big appetite. I don't know how you can fit all of that in. Do you really need that? Should you really be having that? And things along those lines. And these comments can obviously have a very negative effect on how you show up around food and your relationship to food. And I think my experience of it sort of turned into a lot of resentment and somewhat anger around it, and feeling like it was quite unfair that people were saying this to me, because to me, I was just hungry and I just wanted to have more food. And I think that in turn, that actually created even more of an emotional attachment to food. And I call it the fuck it mentality. So when we talk about emotional eating, again, this is very nuanced. This is my experience of it. But I found myself falling into the trap of being like, well, who are you to tell me what I can and can't do around food? So I'm going to go and I'm going to binge. So a perfect example of how this showed up in my life was that I would maybe go out for meals with friends, with the family, and I felt like I would have to restrict the amount of food that I would order in a restaurant. Other people's appetites maybe weren't matching mine, and we would be sharing plates, and then we wouldn't order extra because other people didn't want to eat anymore and they were already full, which is so completely fine. But in my mind, I was like, I still am hungry, and I became quite, I guess, obsessed to that feeling of not having enough. And so I would leave certain events multiple times, and I would go and drive through the Macca's drive-through on the way home after having a full meal with my friends. And I'd be alone in the car, and I would order essentially a whole another meal to myself. A Big Mac, 6 chicken nuggets with sauce, a medium fries, a Sprite, and dessert. And I think emotionally, when we're feeling like a bit off, we can often be like, fuck it. I just want to treat myself with this thing. And I think the treat myself mentality as well is something that has bled into other areas of my life as well. So my relationship with finances, I definitely used to get money, then spend money as well. So getting, like retail therapy. So I would make a bunch of money, and then I'd be like, okay, well, I've earned this money, so now I can treat myself to something I would go and buy, or I'd buy online. And I guess a lot of other people would also relate to that feeling of like you feel a sense of relief, or you feel a sense of, it just makes you feel good in the moment when you're able to like click purchase or buy something in the shop and you're going home with something. The problem is that this feeling is short-lived, and then the after effect feeling come through of disappointment, shame, guilt, and all of those things. And as you can imagine, after I finished that meal at Macca's and went through the drive-through and drove home and hid the bags in a bin where no one else could see it, or I would stuff it into the back pocket of my car or put it in the boot or whatever so that no one knew about it, that made me not only feel extremely sick and way too full, I've had too much food, the effects that it had on my body composition were not ideal either. I was over consuming calories. I felt unwell. The quality of the food is not good. And I always harp on about the quality versus the quantity of food as well. Like that is so important that you're fueling yourself and giving yourself the nourishment that your body deserves. And throughout that time as well, I was active. I was working in the fitness industry. This is back when I first started, and prior to as well, I definitely struggled with these things all the way through up until really only 5 or so years ago, really. And I also felt so much shame and guilt from the moment of feeling restricted in the beginning and then binging all the way through that. You feel shame, you feel guilt, you feel disappointment in your own actions, and you feel like you have a lack of control over your actions. It's so like obsessive and compulsive that you need to fill this void because you have a certain emotion, and that's on being unable to regulate your emotions. And we're going to dive into a lot of this more later when we talk about all of the ways that I worked through this and how I help others to work through this as well. But you can already kind of see some of the patterns that I'm going to be talking about as we go through this. And yeah, I think like one of the biggest turning points for me was when I was living overseas and I was seeing someone overseas who also overate quite a lot, and they also had a lot of emotional baggage, and they turned to food for comfort as well. And so when I could see those patterns in someone else, it was truly like a mirror for me, where I could see that the way that this is affecting that person, and I'm still mirroring those habits and behaviors as well. Like this is my turning point. This is where I need to recognize that this is not healthy. I embody being a healthy person. Like this is what I've literally built my career out of, and this is not who I want to be. And that was the first decision for me to explore this more and really like take a perspective of self-awareness of like, what are these behaviors and actions that I'm taking? How are they really serving me? And how am I actually embodying being the person that I say I want to be and the person that I want to show up as? So that was really the first step and the turning point where I started to look more closely at my behaviors and where these behaviors were actually coming from and the root cause of why I may have been emotionally eating, or I had like, this is another thing too, like sometimes in the later parts of my emotional eating journey, it wasn't even that much of the emotional side of it, but it was the habits of it, because you build these habits, it's repeated behaviors over time, and it becomes so natural and so normal to you that it feels normal, like I said. And so looking at that from a different perspective of seeing that in the mirror in front of me in my relationship, and then being like, that is not the person that I am. That's not the person that I want to be. And so that is the catalyst of change that happened for me. And then when I wanted to start helping others with this, that's when I really took myself on another journey. I actually spent a lot of time like writing out my story and like discovering why these habits and behaviors were a thing for me. And that's when I realized there were actual steps and things that I did in order for me to overcome this. And that is what I am now bringing to you, my clients. And this is one of the biggest teachings and lessons that I want to share with people so that I can help them also overcome this too. So when I do teach my clients about emotional eating, I usually break it into a few different parts. We have the psychology of emotional eating, which we've kind of touched on a little bit already. We also have the neurobiology, the nutritional science, and how we can take control of emotional eating. So in terms of the psychology of emotional eating, the fact that you are already interested in this topic and this episode tells me that you're at least somewhat aware of that when you feel some kind of way, you turn to food to make you feel better. But now we're going to put the why together with that awareness, and it will be a game changer for the next time that you're ready to derail your goals and binge. Okay, so we're going to slow things down and take more notice of what's actually going on internally when we're starting to feel like we want to binge or treat ourselves or turn to food for comfort. A lot of people associate foods that are high in fat, sugar, and salt with positive emotions and feelings of satisfaction after eating them. And I think the very word treat really encompasses that idea that we feel a surge of happiness and joy after consuming our favorite foods because we deserve to be happy, right? And I think that mentality is actually keeping you stuck. The concept of instant gratification and reward from having a buttery croissant, for example, that melts in your mouth and is so delicious and it's flaky and the whole like experience of that, it seems so worthwhile in that moment. And I'm not saying not to eat croissants, I'm saying to moderate. This is what we're talking about. But by withholding from that treat now and opting for something that is more nutritious, that will fill you up and fuel your activity, you're practicing delayed gratification and you're setting yourself up for long-term success. Instead of allowing the present moment desire to chow down a cupcake, a croissant, a flaky pastry, realize that the bigger picture of you, your goals, confident in your dream body, at the beach this summer, you achieve a goal weight, a goal physique, a performance goal, you finally reach your 10K running goal. Those things are way more important and worthy of the delay of the cupcake or the croissant or the flaky pastry in the moment. The science of emotional eating is also something that we're going to talk about, and this is that neurobiology aspect. And when we speak about neurobiology specifically, I want to talk about dopamine. Dopamine is a bit of a trending word right now. It's definitely something I know you guys have probably heard a lot about recently, but understanding the role of dopamine and emotional and binge eating can really help you to see the patterns between binge eating sessions and the intense feelings that come with the cravings for calorie dense and processed foods. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter and it's a really important part of the brain's reward system, which causes the body and the mind to feel good when you're doing something pleasurable. So it makes sense when you're eating a croissant, a donut, a cupcake, that you're going to feel pleasure when you eat it. While this can be triggered by a number of other activities as well, not just eating foods that we enjoy, the same receptors in the brain are activated by thinking about, planning, and also researching food. If we look back through like an evolutionary perspective as well, eating was actually a survival mechanism. When food was difficult to come by in the hunter-gatherer times, the brain wanted to ensure that there was a strong motivation for the hunters to find the food so that they could actually not only fuel their body, but actually just survive. Because the hunter would do whatever it could to find the food to nourish their body. But dopamine affects more than just a person's motivation to eat these days, because over time, more readily available foods that are like fast foods, convenience foods, and highly processed foods, and also highly palatable foods, so things that are far more tasty, are usually higher in sugar, salt, and fat, like I already mentioned before. And they have started to become a source of an intense dopamine boost. So that feeling that you get when you're craving a certain food and you literally cannot shake the need for it. It's that really obsessive compulsive kind of feeling. That's actually dopamine. And the boost of the dopamine hits its peak when you satisfy the craving. This dopamine boost can boost a person's mood while eating and power up cravings of certain foods, like those ones we've already talked about, repeatedly. So that's why when you have cravings, You're like, oh, I need that sugar hit. I need that sugar hit. It happens day after day because you're continuing to remind dopamine reward systems that this is the thing that makes me feel good. This process is actually super similar to what happens during the drug and alcohol addiction pathway as well, because similar regions of the brain are actually lighting up and causing those cravings, causing those addictions, causing those obsessive compulsive thought processes. And then this is how it becomes a habit as well, like I previously mentioned. The secondary part of it being the science of emotional eating, we're going to talk about the nutritional science of emotional eating. So when it comes to this, we've learned that we have a tendency to turn to foods that are higher calorie density and high in flavor as well. But what we also know is that these foods are not processed as well by the body and used in ways that are not necessarily beneficial for health. So let's think about highly processed carbohydrates, foods high in sugars, alcohol, foods high in fats as well as sugars like ice creams, things like that. These are some of our favorites, right? And it's no secret that these foods have adverse effects when eaten in excess, such as weight gain, inflammation in the body, high cholesterol, higher risk of heart disease, but also the effect on our gut health needs to be talked about as well. It slows down our digestive system. It slows down our metabolism. It affects our blood sugar regulation. It affects our mood and our energy levels and even our sleep quality as well. It's so important that we focus on eating a variety of whole foods, including animal and plant-based proteins like beef, chicken, fish, legumes, some dairy, including like Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, and as much unsaturated fats as possible, like avocado, olive oil, nuts, grass-fed butter, and dark chocolate, and carbohydrate sources like pumpkin, sweet potato, grains, regular potato, rice, quinoa. And then also adding in that extra layer of micronutrients as well, like your leafy greens, your fruits, your vegetables. I've already done a chat about nutrition. So if you haven't listened to that yet and you want to dive a little bit deeper on learning and up-leveling your knowledge and your education around your nutrition, you can go back to that episode, Nutrition 101. Don't quote me on which episode it's on, but if you have a look in the list, I'm sure you'll see it quite quickly. We only have 14 episodes. It's not going to take you that long to find it. But you'll be able to see more of the benefits of these food groups and why it's so important to focus on those whole foods, not just, so 80% whole foods and 20% soul foods. So again, we're talking about that moderation. We're not talking about cutting everything out completely and being really restrictive on everything and only focusing on whole foods. We're talking about moderating and focusing on whole foods and treating ourselves sometimes. But the crux of it is that these whole foods that I've just touched on, they're going to sufficiently fuel you and leave you feeling more satisfied than if you ate more processed foods. And here's the thing. Two of the biggest mistakes that I see when I speak to women who struggle with binge eating is that they're significantly under eating protein sources at all meal times or simply skipping something like breakfast because they're not hungry, they're too busy, or they didn't prep something, or they don't have time and they're rushing out the door. The inclusion of eating more regular timed meals and more balanced meals with a little bit of each of the macronutrients and micronutrients is quite often one of the easiest changes that I implement with my clients so that they can have more energy, they snack less, they binge less, they are not in this emotional cycle as much. And especially if you're someone who is finding that you're snacking and binging in the evenings. And like the way that I like to see it as well is I have such a strong, I have such a good relationship with my body and what my body is telling me. My awareness of what my body needs is very high, because I am educated and I know a lot of this stuff. But one thing that I have really noticed is that if I do find myself snacking or like going towards certain foods at certain times of the day, there is always a reason why I'm craving these things or why I'm trying to give my body a certain type of nutrition or fill it up or satiate it more, because I haven't had enough of protein. I haven't actually had enough carbs. I haven't drunk enough water. I'm not fully hydrated, and I'm not fueling myself properly, and therefore I'm turning to other ways to make myself more satisfied and my system satisfied. Our body is always telling us something, even down to cravings. Usually, if I'm having cravings for example, one that's quite common for me is usually like fruits or like something sweet, like candy or lollies or something like that. Or, yeah, usually it's like a fruity sweet kind of thing. That is usually my body's warning sign that I'm thirsty, that I'm dehydrated, and that I need to drink more water and maybe add some electrolytes in to make sure that I'm actually holding on to the water that I'm consuming if I'm really depleted in those minerals at that time. And it usually does the trick. We'll move into like our final part of this chat now, but we're going to talk about how you can take control over your emotional eating behaviors. And the first thing that I want to start with this section is actions speak louder than words. Because once you have that self-awareness, sometimes that self-awareness is not actually enough for you to make the changes that you need to. And you need to start backing your words, your thoughts up with action as well. And that is the only way that you're actually going to move forward and progress with overcoming your emotional eating. And it's like anything in terms of your goals that you set for yourself. There's always going to be compounding actions and behaviors that need to be changed, adjusted, shifted in order for you to get from A to B. When we take action on our goals, instead of just saying that we will do the thing, it creates self-respect. And it really can be that simple. When you take the action, in that moment, it feels a little bit harder. But when we do nourish our body with a balanced meal instead of the eggs Benny with extra bacon and a couple of hash browns and a vanilla latte, we actually don't die. And it's by practicing these things and taking action on these things and showing yourself that doing these actions doesn't cause discomfort. We feel pride, we feel accomplishment, and we feel more energized. Those feelings of shame, those feelings of guilt and disappointment, those really sick, full feeling, they're not there anymore. And we actually feel good about the decisions that we're making when we're not acting the way we have in the past. It does truly only take small compounding efforts to add up to a really big and significant change in the end. And I think I saw a quote very recently, might have even been in the book that I'm reading at the moment. When you make changes every day for a week, you may not feel the immediate response of the changes that you're making. But when you do this thing over a lot of different times, when you do this thing over many, many weeks, months, maybe 6 months, That's when the true change will be felt. And this is so, I guess this is a really big one for anything in terms of like maybe it's saving money, maybe it's achieving a fitness goal, maybe it's a body composition goal, and maybe it's emotional eating as well. These small compounding efforts are the thing. These small, tiny pieces of the puzzle is what makes up that full picture and gets you to your goal. I understand that the cravings can feel so big that you cannot resist, but the reality actually is that you will feel so much more satisfied with your efforts when you do not give in to those temptations. Listen to what your body is trying to tell you as well. If you're tired, rest. If you're stressed, breathe. If you're low on energy, gentle movement with fresh air, go for a walk, get your steps done. If you're angry, release, vent, regroup. If you're lonely, seek connection, meet up with your friends, spend time with your family, and fully connect. If your mood is flat, get some sunshine if it's out in Melbourne, which sometimes it's not in winter. I totally get that. But that sunshine, that vitamin D, that time outdoors it's been scientifically proven that that can actually improve your mood. If you're starving and you're just so hungry and you just have to have something to eat straight away, that is your warning sign that you didn't actually eat enough earlier in the day or maybe even yesterday. And you need to fulfill your body with what it actually needs rather than being like, I just have to have this thing, this chocolate bar, this packet of chips, this packet of lollies on the way home from work, from 7-Eleven, from the servo immediately. Because if you just slow down and go, that is just my body trying to trick me right now, and you go home and you go to the fridge and you get your prepped meal that is nutritious, it's balanced, it's got protein, it's got carbs, it's got vegetables, it's got a small amount of fats, you will feel so satisfied, so proud, and so accomplished after eating that. We are really simple creatures, and sometimes the solutions are just as simple. We live in such an overstimulating, validation-seeking environment with poor tools to help us self-soothe and numb out what we're really feeling, that we've actually forgotten what the basic needs of what we need are. If you haven't heard of it already, or you struggle with regulating your emotions, I highly recommend that you have a look at something called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you just type that into Google, it'll come up with a couple of different graphs that you can see. And when you look at it, I'm looking at it right now, and I can even input it into the podcast for those of you who are watching this on YouTube or watching the video on Spotify. But what you'll see is that at the very base of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid, it is the physiological needs that we need to survive. And that is your foundation. That is your basis. And in there is air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and reproduction. Okay? And as you go up the pyramid as well, it becomes more emotional and more in depth, I would say. But we can't actually become the person that we really want to be without having the foundations. And that is the point of it being a pyramid. That bottom layer is the first and foremost need that we need to fulfill in order for us to be able to build a great life and be really happy within ourselves and be able to achieve great things in life. And that food is that bottom one. So this is how important. The point of explaining this to you is to point out how important it is to treat food with respect and treat your body with respect and fuel and nourish your body properly. Get educated on nutrition, start to understand what your body needs, and to implement and action these tips so that you can build that foundation and move up that pyramid throughout life. The last thing I want to say is that if you can't learn how to regulate your own emotions before heading straight to the pantry after a long day of work that might have been stressful, maybe you've had a very difficult conversation with someone that you love, and you turn to things like alcohol, McDonald's, sweet treats, you're going to stay stuck in a cycle of numbing and self-soothing the wrong way. And I know this because I've been there. This was my story, and it held me back for a really long time, and I wasn't able to achieve my body composition goals. I felt brain fog. I felt like I couldn't move forward in my career. I felt like I didn't really have much purpose. And that kind of sounds like pretty deep, but it is deep because these physiological needs of fueling ourselves really do trickle down to every other part of our life. And this is why I'm so passionate and I'm so committed to sharing this information and what I've learned about how emotional eating can be overcome with you guys and with my audience, and just getting that word out there and really trying to help people living in a very busy, overstimulated lifestyle to make small compounding changes in order for them to live their best life and reach their potential in their life. We're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much for joining me. Please, as always, if you have any feedback at all, send me a DM, leave a comment on the Spotify. And if you aren't already following, please follow along on the Spotify. Watch us on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you next time, wherever we are on the Coordinated Chaos podcast. Love you so much, and thank you so much for being here. Peace out.